The snow didn't fall like in the books, soft, drifting, magical. It slammed sideways, driven by a wind so cruel it felt like it had teeth. It tore at the little girl's coat, whipped her hair against her chapped cheeks, and burned her lungs every time she took a breath. The world was white, but not clean. The whiteness had an edge to it, like bone scraped raw. She was no more than 10 years old, though the set of her jaw gave her the look of someone twice that. Her boots were 2 sizes too big, scuffed raw at the toes, and stuffed with old newspaper to keep her feet from freezing solid. She dragged a sled behind her, nothing but a rickety crate nailed to 2 rusted rails. On it lay her brother, bundled in a threadbare quilt, eyes sunken, lips cracked. His name was Micah. He was 6. And he hadn't spoken since the morning before, when he'd asked if Mama was coming back. She hadn't answered him then. She couldn't now. Her name was Clara. Her hands were raw and red, fingers stiff from gripping the rope, nails split and dirty. Every few steps she stumbled, caught herself, and kept moving. The world around them had no shape, only white hills and gray sky, a drifting nowhere that pulled at her strength like an undertow. Micah coughed behind her, a shallow, rattling sound. She stopped walking, her shoulders hunched forward like someone bracing for a blow. Then she turned back to him, brushed the snow from his face, tucked the quilt tighter, though it was no help against the wind. "You all right?" she asked, though her voice barely carried. He didn't respond. She looked down the slope. The land dipped, then rose again, endless. Somewhere out there was a town, or maybe just a barn, maybe nothing at all. But she'd heard someone say a man lived out here, a rancher. Rich, keeps to himself, doesn't like strangers. But she wasn't asking for kindness, just food, a fire, maybe a roof for a night. Maybe that was too much. Clara's legs ached. Her stomach was a hollow knot. She hadn't eaten since the crust of cornbread 3 days ago, and that had gone to Micah. Her eyes stung, not from tears, but from cold and wind and the refusal to fall apart. She started walking again, 1 step, then another. The sled scraped behind her, sometimes catching on rocks, sometimes dragging smooth. She no longer noticed the pain in her fingers. The cold had gone deeper than skin. A fence post loomed in the distance, barely visible through the swirling snow. Then another, and then a gate, chained but not locked. Beyond it, a long stretch of white ground, punctuated by a black barn roof and the faint outline of a house. Smoke curled from the chimney. She nearly collapsed. The house wasn't close. Still another 1/4 mile, maybe more, but it was there. Real, solid. A world away from the endless nowhere she had come through. Clara didn't think. She just moved. By the time they reached the gate, her knees buckled. She fell into the snow, hands sinking deep. The rope slipped from her fingers. For a long minute, she didn't move. Micah whimpered. That sound, barely more than breath, brought her back. She crawled to the gate, fumbled at the chain, pushed it open. She pulled the sled again, legs trembling, mouth open, breathing ice. The house didn't grow closer. It stayed where it was, cruel and unmoved, while her body gave out piece by piece. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Her sight blurred. The world spun. She didn't notice the horse until it stopped 10 feet in front of her. A man dismounted, long coat flapping in the wind, broad shoulders, weathered face under a black hat. His boots crunched as he walked toward her, slow, deliberate. Clara tried to stand. Failed. She looked up at him, her cracked lips, her dirt-smudged face, her body so hollow it barely cast a shadow. "Please," she said. That was all. The man looked down at her, eyes like cold river stones, then past her, to the boy on the sled. He didn't speak, just turned, whistled once. Another man came running from the barn. A wagon was pulled forward. Arms lifted her. Blankets wrapped tight, heat from a stove inside the house, the scent of coffee, wood smoke, and meat. Then nothing, only the sound of wind outside the walls. Clara woke to the sound of ticking, not a loud clock, but a soft one, the kind that marked time in a room meant to be quiet. Her body was wrapped in warmth, something heavy and woolen. Her skin prickled as the heat tried to sink in, like it didn't trust it yet. For a moment, she didn't move. Just listened. Tick, tick, Tick! She opened her eyes. The ceiling above her was wood, low and dark-stained. Beams ran across it, rough-hewn and solid. A kerosene lamp burned low in the corner, its glow golden and still. She was lying on a cot, thick quilts piled over her. Her coat and boots were gone. Her socks had been replaced. The air smelled of lye soap and tobacco, and under that, something steady. Cedar, maybe pine. A house made from trees, not boards. She sat up too fast. Pain sliced through her ribs. Her throat burned. The room spun. The door creaked open. A woman stepped in, older, maybe in her 60s, but strong in the way prairie women were. Sleeves rolled to her elbows, hands still red from hot water. She looked at Clara like someone who'd seen children brought in half dead before. "You're all right," the woman said, not unkind. "He's asleep. Got food in him. You both need rest more than answers." Clara's mouth worked, but no words came. The woman crossed the room and sat on a stool beside her. She held a mug of something that smelled like broth. Warm, fatty, thick. She pressed it into Clara's hands. "Drink slow." Clara sipped. The heat hit her stomach like a stone in water. She breathed in deep. The woman didn't ask her name, didn't ask where she'd come from. Just sat there while Clara drank, eyes watching her without pushing. After a while, Clara asked, "Whose house is this?" The woman hesitated, then said, "Belongs to Everett Calder. He's the one found you." Clara blinked. "He rich?" The woman laughed, but it wasn't cruel. "Some say that. Has cattle, land, keeps to himself, not much use for strangers. But he ain't mean." The name meant nothing to Clara. All that mattered was Micah. "Can I see him?" The woman stood. "When you're steadier." She didn't argue. Couldn't. Her body had sunk into the cot like it finally believed she might be safe. Later, after the broth and another few hours of sleep, Clara was helped down the hallway. The floor creaked beneath her bare feet. She passed a room with books stacked waist-high, another with tools laid out in neat rows. The air was warm, but the house wasn't fancy. It felt like a place built by hand, not bought. Micah was asleep in the next room, bundled in quilts, one hand curled against his cheek. His face looked less sharp, his breathing even. She stood at the door a long time before stepping inside and brushing hair from his forehead. "I told you I'd find help," she whispered. He didn't stir, but something in his face softened, as if he heard a sound behind her. She turned. Everett Calder stood in the doorway. He was tall, older than her papa had been, but younger than the white in his beard suggested. His coat was gone, his sleeves rolled, his shirt stained with hay and work. He didn't say anything, just looked at the boy, then at Clara. She straightened, suddenly aware of her thinness, the way her clothes hung from her. "Thank you," she said. He gave a short nod. "What's his name?" "Micah." He nodded again. "You walk far?" Clara met his eyes. "From Thistle Creek." That was nearly 20 miles. Everett didn't react, but something changed in his posture. A quiet stiffening. "No family left there?" She shook her head. He didn't ask more, didn't press. He looked again at Micah, then stepped into the room and adjusted the blanket with surprising gentleness. "You'll stay," he said. It wasn't a question. She watched him leave, his boots silent on the wood floor. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel the cold pressing in through the cracks. The next morning, the snow had stopped. Sunlight spilled through the frosted windows, pale and hard, casting long lines across the wooden floor. Clara sat by the stove, her knees pulled to her chest beneath the quilt Mrs. Calder had given her. Her bones still ached, but her hunger was a slow hum now, not a scream. Micah was eating porridge from a tin bowl, seated cross-legged on the rug. His cheeks had regained a little color, though his eyes stayed wary, flitting between the fire and the window. He hadn't spoken much, not even to her. But he was alive, and his spoon scraped the bowl clean. Mrs. Calder moved around the kitchen with quiet purpose, humming low as she worked. Clara had learned her name was Ruth, and that she was Everett's older sister, widowed. Stayed to keep house after her husband passed on. She didn't ask too many questions, just gave orders in a way that felt more like kindness than command. Clara liked her, liked the steadiness, the warmth in the house, the silence between words. Everett hadn't come back inside yet. He'd left before dawn, horse-saddled, rifle slung across his back. Ruth said he was out checking fence lines and feeding the cattle. "He'll be back come noon," Ruth said. "Always is." Clara had nodded. She didn't say it out loud, but part of her didn't believe it. She wasn't used to people keeping promises. Later that morning, Ruth set a basin on the floor and handed Clara a brush. "Go on. Scrub those boots. I reckon you want something useful to do." Clara nodded. Her hands weren't fully steady yet, but she took the brush and started in on the mud-caked leather. It felt good work that had a start and an end, not just surviving. Doing. Micah watched her from the rug. "You want to help too?" Ruth asked him, eyebrows raised. He shook his head. "Well then, you can sit and keep us company." The boots came clean, though the leather had cracked in places. Ruth took one look and said, "We'll find something better before winter's done." Clara didn't answer, but something flickered in her chest. A quiet surprise. Just before midday, the sound of hooves echoed through the snow-packed yard. Clara stood from her stool and went to the window. Everett rode in alone. The wind tugged at his coat, but he didn't rush. Just moved like someone who'd done this 1,000 times and didn't see the point in hurrying. He dismounted, tied the horse to the post, and pulled off his gloves. His eyes flicked up toward the house. Clara stepped back from the window. By the time he came in, the kettle was on, and Ruth had a pot of stew bubbling on the stove. Everett nodded once at Clara, then knelt by the fire, warming his hands. He didn't speak, just sat there, the heat rising around him. Clara wanted to ask him something, wanted to know why he'd helped, what he expected. But the words stayed tangled inside her. After lunch, Ruth pulled her aside. "Come on, time to learn your way around." Clara followed her out to the barn. The snow crunched underfoot, crusted and brittle now in the cold sunlight. Inside the barn, it smelled of hay and old wood. 2 horses stood in stalls, tails swishing. A row of tools lined one wall. Barrels, feed sacks. "Everett'll need help come spring," Ruth said. "A girl who can pull a sled through a blizzard can sure shovel hay." Clara nodded, swallowing the burn in her throat. The work came slow at first. Her muscles were weak. Her fingers blistered easy. But she pushed through it, silent and watchful. She mucked stalls, carried buckets, learned how to split kindling without shattering it. She liked the rhythm, the way it made her feel solid again. She caught Everett watching her once from across the yard, his eyes narrow, unreadable. He didn't praise, didn't scold, just nodded, like he saw what she was trying to do and respected it. That night, she sat on the porch after the others had gone to bed. Micah was asleep, belly full, curled under a thick wool blanket. The stars were out, brittle and sharp, and the moon hung low like a pale coin. Everett came out and sat beside her. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Then he said, "You got grit, more than most men I know." Clara looked down at her hands. "Had to." He nodded. "Still, not everyone would have made it." She turned toward him. "Why'd you help us?" Everett didn't answer right away. He looked out at the hills, the way the snow caught the light. "Used to be someone found me in the snow once," he said finally. "When I was no older than your brother. Didn't think I'd make it either." Everett didn't answer right away. He looked out at the hills, the way the snow caught the light. "You can stay," he added, "as long as you want." "Used to be someone found me in the snow once," he said finally. "When I was no older than your brother. Didn't think I'd make it either." She didn't say thank you. Couldn't trust it yet. And beside her, Everett sat silent, a steady presence in the cold. The thaw came slow that year. By mid-March, the snow receded in patches, leaving behind fields of brown grass and sodden earth. Ice dripped from the eaves in quiet rhythms, and the wind softened, trading its bite for a damp chill. The ground smelled of rot and rebirth. Clara woke early each morning now, before Ruth lit the stove. She pulled on her patched boots better now, thanks to a pair Everett had found stored in the loft and slipped outside, shoulders tight against the cold. The barn welcomed her with the warmth of sleeping animals and the soft rustle of hay. She had learned to move in silence like the animals themselves, to sling feed, to shovel muck, to comb knots from horse manes with patience and steady hands. Each task a quiet way of building something she couldn't name. Micah followed her some mornings, dragging his own small boots through the mud, but mostly he stayed close to Ruth. He was gaining weight, speaking more. Sometimes he even laughed a small, surprised sound, like he'd forgotten how and was learning again. One morning, Everett stood by the corral, watching the fence line. Clara came up beside him, leaning against the rail. That one's pregnant, he said, nodding at a red cow with a wide belly. Due in a week. Clara squinted. How can you tell? He shrugged. Been around long enough. You start seeing things before they happen. She considered that. What else do you see? Everett didn't answer right away. Then, a girl trying hard not to need anything. Clara looked down. Her hands clenched the rail. I don't like owing people. You don't, he said. Not here. The wind tugged her braid. He reached into his coat and handed her a folded piece of paper. It was a map hand-drawn, charcoal marks on old feed sack paper. Start learning the land, he said. You'll need it come branding season. Her heart tightened in her chest. Not with fear. With a sudden strange feeling of being seen. She took the paper, held it like something rare. That night, after supper, Everett pulled out a fiddle from the cabinet. It was scarred and old, the strings worn, the bow missing a few hairs. Ruth raised her brows, surprised. Haven't heard you touch that thing in years. Everett didn't answer. Just tuned it slow, eyes fixed on some far-off memory. Then he played, not well but with soul. The notes were crooked, rough, like boots across floorboards. But they carried weight. Micah curled up on the rug, eyes wide. Ruth stirred stew and didn't speak. Clara sat on the edge of the table, hands clasped tight in her lap. The music filled the house in a way silence never had. Later, when the fire was low and the fiddle lay quiet again, Clara said, You ever think of leaving? Everett leaned back in his chair. Did once. What stopped you? Everett didn't answer. Just tuned it slow, eyes fixed on some far-off memory. She nodded, understanding more than she could say. Everett didn't answer. Just tuned it slow, eyes fixed on some far-off memory. What stopped you? He looked toward the fire. The land held on. Spring came fast after that. The creek swelled and carried chunks of broken ice downstream. The mud thickened, dried, cracked. Grass pushed through the dirt, stubborn and green. You built all this? Clara asked. Everett nodded. Me and my father. Then me alone. She looked out across the land. It's beautiful. He didn't respond. One day, after a long ride to check cattle, they sat on the ridge overlooking the valley. Below them, the ranch stretched out in a wide arc, fences, barns, fields coming back to life. She turned toward him. Why'd your father stop? Clara didn't flinch. Mine too. Only he left instead. The words hung in the air, brittle and raw. Everett looked at her for a long time. That why you don't trust easy? I do trust, she said, quiet but sure. Just not fast. He nodded, as if that was fair. Back at the house, Ruth called them in for supper. Micah met them at the porch, face smeared with something sweet. Clara wiped it with the sleeve of her coat. Everett looked at her for a long time. That why you don't trust easy? Inside, the fire burned warm. The table was full. Laughter came easier now. Not loud, not constant, but real. Trouble came in late April, riding in on hard hooves and loud voices. Clara was hauling a sack of seed from the shed when she heard the dogs barking sharp, urgent, different. She dropped the bag, wiped her hands on her skirt, and stepped outside just as two riders crested the rise and came down fast toward the yard. Dust rose behind them, dry and yellow, curling into the sky like smoke. Everett stepped out from the barn, shotgun in one hand. He didn't raise it, just held it like a tool he might or might not use. Clara stood behind him, and Ruth came to the porch, dish towel still in her hands. The riders pulled up short. One man was thin, sharp-eyed, and wore a suit that had seen better days. The other was bigger, face ruddy, eyes small and mean. Everett called her, the smaller one said. Been a while. Everett didn't answer. His jaw was tight. We heard you got company, the thin one said, looking past him. Couple of runaways. Girl and her brother. Clara's heart froze. She didn't move. You got names for them? Everett asked. The man grinned. No need. The sheriff back in Thistle Creek says a couple of kids ran off after their mama took sick. Left a house behind full of debt and no one to claim it. That a crime now? Everett said, voice flat. They squatting on someone else's land? No, Everett said. They're on mine. The bigger man shifted in his saddle. We got orders to bring 'em back. Kin's been found. Some aunt up in Delano wants 'em. Clara's chest clenched. She hadn't heard of any aunt. No one had ever come looking before. Not once in all those frozen nights. She send a letter? Everett asked. The men didn't answer. You got papers? The thin man leaned forward, smug. Don't need 'em. The law says. This land says different, Everett interrupted. You want to talk law, bring the sheriff. And the letter. Until then, you're trespassing. The air tightened. Even the dogs had gone quiet now. You gonna shoot us, Calder? The big man said. Everett didn't blink. Not if you ride out peaceful. The silence stretched. Then the thin one spit into the dirt. We'll be back. They turned and rode off, hooves pounding, dust trailing. Everett watched them until they disappeared behind the ridge. Ruth came down from the porch, her face pale. Clara hadn't moved. Her legs felt rooted to the spot. What happens now? She asked. Everett looked at her. They'll come again, with paper or with men. Clara nodded. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. I ain't going back. No, Everett said. You're not. That night, Clara sat outside on the porch, watching the stars come out one by one. Micah slept inside, curled next to the fire. Ruth had made chamomile tea and left it steaming by the rocker. Everett sat beside her, quiet as usual. You really think there's an ant? She asked. He shook his head. I think someone saw a chance to make money moving kids around. Happens more than it ought to. She bit the inside of her cheek. We don't belong to anybody. He looked at her then, his face rough in the moonlight. You do now. Those words stayed with her through the night. She couldn't sleep. Her body wanted to rest, but her mind kept running back to the dust, the riders, the way her name hadn't been used because they didn't care enough to know it. At dawn, she rose, put on her boots, found Everett in the barn. I want to stay, she said. I want to work. Earn it. He leaned against a post, brushing down his horse. You already have. Clara took a breath. But I want to learn more. Fix fence, brand calves, run a herd. He studied her. All right, he said. You'll ride with me. She did. Day after day she worked beside him, learned to move cattle with sharp calls and steady hands, learned to read the land, not just the roads, but the weather, the signs in the sky, the way birds flew low when a storm was coming. She was still just a girl, but the frontier didn't care for years. It cared for grit, for fire, for the will to keep going, and she had all of that. Everett, for all his quiet ways, started to show more of himself too. Told her stories, some true, some maybe not, about when he was a boy, about how the land had nearly broken him more than once, about the woman he'd once loved but couldn't hold on to. Clara didn't ask for details. Some things hurt more in the telling, but they were building something now, something made of work and silence and trust, a life, piece by piece. And even if the riders came back, with paper or guns or threats, she knew where she stood, on solid ground, with someone who'd fight for her, and someone she'd fight for in return. The riders did come back. It was a Sunday, late in May, with the sun high and the fields greening fast. Clara had just come in from the pasture, cheeks streaked with sweat and dirt, boots caked with mud. She was setting a bucket down by the pump when she heard the sound again, hoofbeats, slower this time, steadier. She turned toward the road. 2 wagons, 4 men. One wore a badge. Clara froze. Everett stepped out from the barn, shirt sleeves rolled, gloves in his back pocket. Ruth came down from the porch, her face unreadable. Micah stood in the doorway behind her, clutching a tin cup. The sheriff was an older man, not the one from Thistle Creek. He looked tired, sunburned, like a man who spent too many years keeping order with too little help. He carried papers. We got notice, he said, raising the folded sheaf. Family claim out of Delano, certified. Everett didn't move. You read it yourself? The sheriff hesitated. Judge signed off. Can't say more than that. The thin man from before name was Hal. Clara had since learned smirked from atop the first wagon. Told you we'd be back. Everett stepped forward, slow and solid. She's no ward of the state, he said. She works here. She lives here. Kid too. Nobody's mistreating them. You can ask around. Don't matter, Hal said. Blood's blood. Clara stepped between them, heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. I'm not going, she said. The sheriff looked at her, then really looked, took in her posture, her calloused hands, the way she stood, not as a girl but as someone rooted. You sure? He asked, voice low. Yes, sir. Girl, you don't get to choose, Hal snapped. We got the writ. Clara turned to Everett. They can't take us without a fight, right? Everett gave the smallest nod. The sheriff sighed. There's a hearing. Judge out in Three Pines. You'll come. Tell him what you told me. He'll decide. When? Everett asked. 3 days. Hal spat. She'll go, one way or another. No, Everett said. Not today. The sheriff nodded once. Tucked the papers away. We'll see you there. They rode off. Dust hung in the air a long time after they'd gone. Clara didn't speak. Neither did Everett. But something had settled between them now. A line drawn. A promise. The next days were a blur of preparation. Ruth packed food and stitched up Micah's coat. Everett shaved, dug out a clean shirt. Clara wrote a letter she never sent to no one, just words she needed to say. The morning they left, the sky was low and gray. The wind carried the smell of rain. Clara sat beside Everett on the wagon bench, Micah tucked between them, wrapped in his blanket. She'd never been to a courthouse before, never stood before a judge. Her hands were damp with sweat, but her back stayed straight. Her voice did not shake. The judge listened, asked questions, looked through the papers with bored eyes. Then he looked at Clara. You have a place here? Work? Shelter? Yes. You want to stay? I do. And the man? He nodded at Everett. You trust him? Clara didn't look away. With my life. The judge scribbled something, then looked at the thin man Hal and the false papers he carried. Nothing here makes her property, he said. She stays where she chooses. Hal sputtered. The judge didn't care. His gavel hit wood. It was done. On the ride home, Clara didn't speak. Didn't need to. She sat with one hand resting on Micah's shoulder and the other on her knee, watching the road stretch ahead. The house came into view by late afternoon. Ruth was on the porch. Smoke rose from the chimney. Chickens pecked at the yard. Home. Later, Everett stood in the field with her, leaning against the fence, watching the calves scatter and buck in the grass. You still mean it? He asked. About wanting to stay? She nodded. I don't know much, but I know what's true. And what's that? That I'm done being someone people give away. He nodded. They stood there a while, the light golden and slow. That evening, Clara found Micah asleep, with a wooden carving in his hands, something Everett had whittled. A tiny horse, rough and solid. She tucked the blanket higher on his chest and stepped outside. The stars were starting to show. The wind was gentle, brushing her face like something remembered. Everett came out and handed her a folded cloth. She unwrapped it. A small silver ring, not fancy, just strong, plain. I know you're still young, he said, but this life, it's yours if you want it. This land, this home, maybe, someday, more than that. She held the ring in her hand, felt the weight of it. Yes, she said. He smiled just barely. They stood together, quiet, while the moon rose. Inside, the fire glowed warm. A family not born but built, piece by piece, stood whole.